Hi everyone, my name's Jackie. I am the Adult Services Librarian at Noble North Syracuse, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Terry. Terry, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm Terry Morris. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at Cicero Library.
Woohoo, Noble. So we're both excited to bring to you guys this discussion we're going to be doing throughout all of summer, and it's called Reading Through the Decades. And the premise of this is that Terry and I each pick books from post-World War II eras. So Terry started with the 50s, I started with the 60s, and we didn't tell each other what we're reading. We sat down, we read them separately, and now we're getting together to have this discussion of try to tell each other what we read without actually telling each other what we read. Just kidding. We're going to show each other the covers eventually.
Yeah.
But so Terry, do you want to kick us off with the 50s?
Sure. So I chose The Philadelphian by Richard Powell. Richard Powell, just a little background, was born in Philadelphia. He was a seventh generation Philadelphian, and that matters. You'll know why when I talk about the book. And he was born in 1908. He died in 2006, I believe. And no, that's not true. He died in 1999. That's when he died. Yes. But he wrote 19 novels, all told, most of them before he published Philadelphian, which was his most successful novel. That was published in 1957, and it was a bestseller for about 6 months. It was made into a movie with Richard Vaughn and Paul Newman as the main character. And it's a really interesting book about the upper crust society of Philadelphia. And so the book is broken up into 3 different sections, covering 4 different generations of the same family. The original member of the family who came to America was a 16-year-old girl who literally came with nothing. She didn't have a job. She didn't have any money. She didn't have anything. And she was talking to one of the people who works the boat that she came over on. And he said, "You don't have anybody that you can talk to when you get there?" And she's like, "No, I don't have any family here. They're all back in Ireland." And so he hooked her up with the captain of the boat. And the captain of the boat would traditionally, at least on this boat, take all the unattached women who were coming over to migrating to America to an employment agency. And so she went with him to an employment agency where she kind of ticked off everybody. But the upper crust woman who was there trying to find a new maid for her home, she was not satisfied with any of the other people that were there or any of the other people that the captain brought. But she saw how this one particular woman, or girl really, she was 16, basically carried herself and would stick up for herself if pushed. And she hired her on the spot immediately. And so she became this lady's maid. And from that, she worked in the house for a while. And there was a coachman in that house who really fell in love with her and wanted to better himself. He was saving all his money to open his own livery stable. She immigrated like right after the Civil War. And so they made an arrangement that they would get married when he could pay for his own and buy his own livery stable. But she knew that just because she married this guy, he would be a good provider, but he wouldn't get them up the rung of the social structure in Philadelphia, which is what she really wanted more than anything. So after years of working for this family and this guy having the understanding with her, she seduced the son of the house when he came home drunk one night, and of course became pregnant. So she was thrown out of the house. The son was, "I'm going to do the right thing." And she was like, "What are you talking about? We just had fun. Don't worry about it." And he was shocked by that. And he said, "Okay, if there's nothing to worry about, then I'm not going to marry you. But if there is something to worry about, I will marry you." And she's like, "No, you don't have to." I still don't know why she did that, why she didn't just marry the guy, because that would have immediately brought her up the social rung. But if anything, that's the one flaw in the book. So she had a girl, and she opened up her own seamstress shop. And one day, many years later, this is now the second section of the book, a hoity-toity couple comes in because the lady needs to get her dress fixed for a ball that she's going to. And now the woman who is the product of that assignation, shall we say, because she's now a woman, is there, as well as her mother. And when the girl in this couple had to step out for a moment, excuse me, the guy was talking, he was a Latin professor and a Latin teacher, and he was talking about a particular quote in Latin. The one about the aspect of her eyes, the aspect of her face. Yeah. And he didn't know it. And his girlfriend didn't know it, but the seamstress's daughter knew it. And she said it. And that got the guy's attention. And then they started going around. And he was on the down low because his life would have improved dramatically if he married the woman that he didn't really have much in common with, but was from a nice family. And so he didn't marry her, and he married the daughter of the seamstress. And they had a daughter. And that daughter got a job as a maid in a very nice home. And the thing with that home is the son was sick. He was an alcoholic. He was actually an alcoholic because, although it's not expressly said in the book, because he was gay. So remember, this was published in the 50s, so they could talk about him drinking all the time, but they didn't talk about why he didn't particularly do well with the ladies, and it's because he was gay. The first night that the now third generation, so we've got the grandmother who showed up, had the daughter, who got with the Latin teacher. They had a daughter. So now it's the third generation. This daughter is working as a maid in a very nice house. And they have the alcoholic son who's gay, but no one's saying that out loud. And the mother of the house had no daughters. And so she never was able to throw a coming out debutante ball. So what she did is, over the years, for like 15 years, she would choose someone from a good family but with no money. And she would give that girl a coming out. And then the whole purpose of the debutante ball, as you probably know, is to meet eligible men and to get married into good Philadelphia families. So she chooses the daughter of the Latin teacher and the seamstress. She moves her into the house, and they're going to go down to the shore for the summer, and she's going to teach her everything she needs to know about having a good coming out ball. The first night she's there, she goes down to the library, and she's just looking around, and there's the drunk son. And he is not in a good mood. He's talking about how his mother's always trying to control him. And his one line is that stands out and makes me obviously think he's gay, is, "My mother wants to start a dynasty here in Philadelphia, but in order to do that, you need to have a prince and a princess. Well, I'm the prince, and there are no princesses, and there never will be any princesses." Well, long story short, the mom pushes those two together and they get married. So the mom's thrilled because people will stop talking about her son. And the night of the wedding, when they're supposed to do what you do on the night of your wedding, he can't do it. And he, in a rage, flies out of the hotel room, runs out of the hotel, jumps in his car, and drives off. Well, now, this young lady is left in the hotel room by herself, and she just decides, I'm going to go out for a walk. And she's walking with no intention, but she winds up outside the work site of the man she really loves, who is an Irish guy who's got nothing but, in 20 years, he's going to be loaded because he's starting a business where he tears down buildings. And there's a lot of tearing down in Philadelphia at this time because they're tearing down old to put up new. And he is so concerned about this job site that he's on, because it's the first one he's ever gotten, that he actually moved in there. He's there 24 hours a day, and he moved there so he can keep an eye on it and make sure everything goes perfectly. So he comes home drunk on the night that the woman he loves married somebody else, and she finds herself outside of that work site. And so she goes in, and he came home with a lady of the evening who the girl pays off to go away. And the guy, Callahan, Mike Callahan is his name, is in the shack that he lives in and sleeps in, trying to turn the light on to bring the lady of the evening in with him. And he's drunk and can't find lights, so she goes in, and they do what you do on the night you get married, but they're not married to each other. And then when they're done, she believes that he's so drunk, he doesn't know it was her. He thinks it was the lady of the evening. So she goes back to the hotel, and the next morning she is awoken by the hotel manager to inform her that her husband is dead because he wiped out in his sports car. Yeah, which he loves his sports cars. So he drives like a bat out of hell. And she, of course, is pregnant. And to Philadelphia society, it's the son's baby. But she knows it's not, obviously. But she doesn't tell anybody. And her mother-in-law says, okay, I'll take care of you because you've got my next generation. And they kind of come to heads about how do you raise this kid. And the mother-in-law basically says, look, as long as you're in my house, I will pay for everything for this kid, but you're going to raise the kid the way I want to. And she goes, no, I'm not, and gets up and takes the kid and leaves and goes back to her mother's house. All right, so that kid, by the way, is a boy, the first one in 3 generations. And Mike Callahan figured out as soon as he came to see the baby that it was his, because they look so much alike. And he's like, I'll marry you now. I mean, come on, let's get married. And she's like, I can't do that because you're still Mike Callahan and he's a Lawrence. And that name means something in Philadelphia. And he's going to do much better than any of us will ever do because he's got that name. And so he grows up. He goes to the prep school that his grandfather teaches Latin in. And from there, he gets a scholarship to Princeton. And from there, he goes to UPenn Law School. And while he's at Princeton, he meets and falls in love with a society woman. And the night before he graduates from Princeton, she goes to visit and says, let's run off and get married. If we wait, my father will talk us out of it. Let's just go do it now. And he gets talked into it, and he's like, yes, let's do it. And they're getting up to leave, and her father walks in and says, listen, I know you're going to go off and get married, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with any of that. He's a good man. I like him. But let me talk to him man to man. And he talks the guy out of marrying his daughter by promising to be his sponsor in law school. And when you get out of law school, I'll give you a job. I work at one of the most prestigious law firms in Philadelphia. And so that's what the guy agrees to. His name is Anthony Judson Lawrence, is the guy who was going to run away with his girlfriend. And he goes up to tell her, we're going to do everything, but we're just going to wait for a couple of years until I get out of law school. And she's like, right then and there, she knows, no, we're never going to get married because you let my dad talk you out of it. And so they go their separate ways, and he goes on to have this brilliant career. He works for a judge and writes this great book, essentially what becomes a classic textbook in law school about the Anti-Sherman Trust Act. What do I know? But and then he goes on to marry, and does a whole lot of cool things. But one of his friends from his social days is also a raging alcoholic, and his family's trying to control who he's going to marry. And he's not gay, but he is not happy with the fact that they won't let her marry the woman he loves. And so that's what causes him to become an alcoholic. And the best part of the novel is the part where he is driving drunk and he kills somebody accidentally, and he is tried for manslaughter. And the family's got it all figured out. They're going to convict him of manslaughter and send him to a drunk tank, a place where he can dry out. But he's like, no, I want Tony to defend me and to get me off this, get me out of this. And Tony does that. And the only way Tony can do that is to try not the guy, but Philadelphia society. So everybody's like, Tony, if you do this and you try Philadelphia society, you're done in this town. And he's like, well, so be it. And so he did that. He tried Philadelphia society. That section of the book is great. And he got the guy off, but he still managed to marry a nice woman from a nice family. And the book comes to a conclusion. I'm not going to tell you what happened, but his friend and the guy who he figured out at some point was his actual father come to him and say, we want you to run for DA, and then in 4 years we want you to run for mayor of Philadelphia, because if you do, then we're going to run the friend who's an Italian for DA, and then he'll run for mayor after you do, after you become mayor for a term or two. And he goes, okay, I got to go home and talk to my wife about it. And his wife is like, absolutely not. We don't do that. Our this level of status of society, we don't beg people to vote for us. We don't, do that kind of stuff. So no. And I'm going to leave it at that, because he says, well, I now have to go and decide if I'm going to do this or not. And she's thinking, oh, well, no, wait, I already decided for you. You're not. And he's like, I'm going into my office in the house and decide. So that's pretty much that. It's a really well-written book. It's all about Philadelphia hoity-toity society, and how to get into it, and not how to get into it, but what happened to this one family. It took them 3 generations or 4 generations really to get into it. And it's really well written. And this guy published like 19 novels, like I said earlier, and most of them were published before he wrote The Philadelphian, which is considered to be his best book. 4 of his books have been made into movies, including The Philadelphian.
Interesting. So basically, you read a combination of a post-Civil War romance novel, Great Gatsby, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
A little bit of Mr. Smith, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Cool.
Yeah, it was
Cool.
really good.
That sounds really interesting. And it also sounds like a very long book. How long is that?
It was, it wasn't actually that long. It was only like 300 or 400 pages.
Oh, wow.
It was not a 600-page deal.
I was expecting like a John Jake situation, which is like that thick.
Yeah, no, I had to read it on the Kindle
Yeah.
because I have a hardback copy of it, or a paperback copy of the 50th anniversary edition, which is what was produced in 2006. But I can't find it.
Oh,
So I had to go
okay.
buy the Kindle edition, and that doesn't really do the paging properly.
Right.
It tells me that there's 6,000 pages, but the page is only that big, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Interesting.
it's kind of messed up, but it's a really, really well done book.
Yeah, it's interesting because it brings up so many different points of society throughout like that 100-year, 90-year
Yeah,
span.
yeah,
That's really interesting. And as a daughter of Irish, like the great 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 granddaughter of Irish immigrants, it's
yep,
interesting to see from someone who came right off the boat, had all this prejudice against them, and then to see the generational rise of the family
yep,
up
yep.
to this. And I really wish you would say how it ended, but I guess I just have to read it on my own to figure out.
Yes, it's not a mystery. So, although most of everything else the guy wrote was a mystery,
Oh,
he wrote
interesting.
a lot of mysteries, and then for some reason he decided to do this. Um, and there's an interview in or a piece in the book written by his daughter who talks about how this book came about. And then there's interviews with her online and stuff. And one of the interviews online, she's asked, is this just basically an autobiography of your father? Because your father kind of did a very similar path as Anthony Lawrence. And she said, no, he literally wrote it to explain to my mother what Philadelphia society is like. That's all it was.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
That's so
yeah,
interesting. And of course, it's just talking about like a specific subset of Philadelphia society at the time.
right. Mhm.
So Tony, the one who's running for mayor, DA, and then eventually mayor,
Yeah,
is that storyline set in the 50s?
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
that's where it comes in the 50s. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
probably from the time he was born, which was probably in the teens, like around World War I,
Mm-hmm.
and then to the 50s. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's really interesting then that they're talking about. So at the time in the 50s, the immigration, like the whole immigration issues, the prejudice against
yeah,
obviously blacks, but then also Irish, Italians,
yep,
Greeks, pretty much anyone who wasn't American
yeah.
was so high that it's interesting that they were pushing him to run for DA and then mayor. Who was pushing him?
His Irish father, who he kind of knew was his father, but wasn't 100% sure.
Oh, okay, okay.
And more importantly, a friend of his from school who was an Italian. And
Oh,
they
okay.
walked into his office and they said, listen, we want to propose something to you. I'm going to run for mayor. And Tony's like, oh, I think that's a great idea. You won't win because the society people will not back you. But I think you'd make a great mayor. And he goes, okay, good. And I think the way I do that is to run for DA first. Yeah, that's a very good idea. That'll get your name out everywhere and you'll still not win because the society people won't let you. And the guy goes, he's basically saying, I'm glad you think that because we have an idea as to how I can do it. Oh, what's that? You run for DA first, and then 4 years later, you run for mayor. When you run for
Gotcha.
mayor, I run for DA. We're in the same party, so it'll work out better.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, you guys trapped me. And like, not really. You don't know it. You're not aware of it, but you've been getting ready to do this your entire life. I mean, you've
Yeah.
made all the right decisions, and he did. There's example after example while he's thinking about it in his home office. When he was at the academy that his grandfather taught at, there was a teacher there who worked with him on his valedictorian speech. And the teacher kind of steered him into making a really inflammatory speech that would have just ticked everybody off. And we come to find out the teacher was fired from his job for other reasons because he wasn't a good fit and he wasn't coming back next year.
Oh.
So he would have been gone. and Tony would have been left dealing with the repercussions. And Tony only figured out that he was talked into writing this speech on his way from his chair to where he gave the speech. So at the last second, he goes, no, I'm not doing that speech. I'm going to do the one that I wrote that my teacher said was boring and what was expected and all that kind of stuff. And it was totally boring, totally non-threatening, completely what the administration would have expected and the parents would have expected. But he walked up to the headmaster of the school afterwards, and the headmaster knew all about the other speech because the teacher who got fired and who helped Tony work on the speech told him all about it. And the headmaster said, said to himself, I'm going to let Tony decide what he's going to do. I'm not going to tell him, don't do that. There'll be repercussions. And Tony did the right thing. And the headmaster told him, I got you a scholarship to Princeton. So you got in Princeton and I got you a full ride to pay for it. So we're all good. And Tony said, if I had given the other speech, would I have lost that scholarship? And the headmaster goes, oh, well, no. When of course he would have lost everything.
Right. Yeah.
So, but anyway, yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. That does sound, and I like the idea of like the whole generational, I think I've said it, watching as this family grows into this. I think Tony kind of is supposed to be a personalization, an idealization of everything that the whole family has worked for since, grandma got off the boat all the way up to now he's approaching this, where you leave us on a cliffhanger.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like it. What was your favorite part?
The courtroom part.
Yeah.
Where he put the society on trial. That's really the best part, I thought.
So when you say society, is it just general Philadelphia society, like the people of Philadelphia versus Tony?
Yeah, like their rules, the way they treat their children, like not human beings, but like people who need to go with that family so we can get a higher status, get all the better charity committees. My mom can get on the better charity committees if I marry up.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of pressure that those people put, and still do to this day, I believe, put on their kids is crazy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a great lead-in to talk about. I mean, we saw it with the admission scandals from a year and 2 years ago. Of course, those aren't Philadelphia society people, but, they're the upper echelon of our society. We could say, they're the elite. And these kids, maybe they aren't the best, the brightest, but their parents still love them and their parents still want them to do the best they can. And so they push them into eventually maybe illegal activities.
Yeah. I thought that whole thing was crazy because I didn't know the way the media presented it is it was a scandal of how these parents got their kids into the Ivy League.
Mm-hmm.
And very few of the schools were Ivy League. I mean,
yeah, no.
UCLA and the University of Southern California are both excellent schools, but they're not Ivy League.
No.
So I didn't know what the parents were doing.
Yeah.
It was kind of crazy, but whatever.
It is interesting that is what it's also like how the media skews it. I guess you could talk about that because I'm imagining newspapers, if we're talking about Tony as if he were a real person, in the past, they would have probably just gone after him when he was presenting this trial, saying defamatory lawyer is talking about this, bringing the people of Philadelphia on trial, our best of the best are now being blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. And then after, of course, he would have been the media darling. And presumably as he's running for DA and mayor, he would have been the darling of the streets, the darling of the immigrants, quote unquote.
Which is one of the things that the guys who are trying to talk him into it told him.
Yeah.
They won't, those people will, the average person will remember what you did, not just in that courtroom, but the fact that you do a lot of good charity work and volunteer work to help people in Philadelphia in general.
A man of the people.
Yeah, pretty much.
Interesting.
Yep.
Anything else to say about it? Anything else you want to talk about it?
No, that's about it.
Okay. Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess it's my turn now.
Yes.
So I read something that was written in the 1960s. And specifically, I read a book called In the Heat of the Night by John
Oh,
Ball. Have you heard of it?
was that the movie and TV show?
They made a movie. They made like 8 movies. They made a TV series out of it. One of the most famous TV series, because it's a whole series of books. It's the Virgil Tibbs series. And he's a
You're
homicide
kind of
detective.
freezing up there.
Oh, sorry. Bad internet here. Let's try that. That a little better?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Say that all over again and we'll edit that other stuff out.
Perfect. So there's a whole TV series. There's multiple TV series, multiple movies, all sorts of stuff about it. The most famous one was recorded in 1988 and had 8 seasons, starring Carol O'Connor.
Hang on. You're still dying. I think it might be on my end.
Okay, hold tight. Okay, so as I was saying, I read In the Heat of the Night by John Ball. It was adapted into multiple TV series, multiple movies. And apparently it's in the 9th grade English syllabus, but my school never read it.
Yeah, mine either.
Neither have a lot of my peers. I'm not sure. But reading it, I can see why it might have one time have been. It is a Penguin classic. And John Ball, who's the author, born 1911, died 1988, wrote more than 30 novels, mostly mysteries, war fiction, and adventure stories. His most well-known is the Virgil Tibbs series. In the Heat of the Night is the first in the Virgil Tibbs series. Virgil Tibbs he's a black homicide detective from Pasadena, California in the 1960s. And he's kind of, I almost like to compare him to, not Shakespeare, Sherlock.
Oh, yeah.
He reminds me a lot because he's very much like he has a method of deduction. He examines the evidence, he interviews, he does like everything we would assume a homicide detective would do, thanks to Law and Order that we know that they do. But at this time, it's kind of a novel way of doing science, a novel way of doing investigations. So that's Virgil. He's very well written, well spoken, and he's just kind of this interesting character in this story. So let me set the scene for you. In the Heat of the Night is set in 1965 in a town of Wells, South Carolina. So think of, it's the South, it's 1965. Yeah. There's one black guy coming in to this town of white, in the author's word, hillbillies. And there's a murder in the town of Wells, South Carolina. Beat cop Sam Woods is out doing his rounds at night. It's about 2:00 in the morning. He stops for his break, gets dinner, breakfast, whatever you eat at that time of night. And then he goes out to finish up his rounds, and there's a dead body lying in the street. And the dead body is that of Italian conductor. I think his name is Endicott. I lost the name. But he's an Italian conductor. He's supposed to be bringing this music festival to the town of Wells, South Carolina. This is when music festivals were really like becoming a big thing all around. Yeah. And so Sam Woods, the beat cop, calls it in to his supervisors, to the police station. They're like, okay, hang out there. We'll send people. And then we get introduced to the other main cop of the story, who is he's the chief officer. He's the chief policeman. And he is a man from Texas. And he is, if you picture at the time, white Texan policeman, that is our chief police officer. Yeah. He can't be bothered. He was like, I was hired to do this because I know what I'm doing. So what I say goes. So he shows up at the crime scene, and he's like, okay, we're going to do a chalk outline. I laughed at the chalk outline. I was like, okay, we're in the 60s. Chalk is cool. I was envisioning like there's all those pictures of like the, I don't know, dead body ones, and they're just all splayed out like this. Yeah. That's pretty much what this scene looked like. And he's like, well, it can't have been that long ago because the coroner says that the body is this temperature, so he died within the last like hour or something like that, right before Sam, the beat cop, found him. So they're like, okay, I want all you police officers, you're going to go canvass the area, you're going to go look for anyone suspicious. And then he looks at Sam, he says, Sam, I want you to go to the train station. I want you to see if someone is at the train station trying to flee the scene, pretty much. Sam goes, okay. And Sam is kind of like this good old boy, South Carolina, yes ma'am, no sir. Like, I just envision him kind of lean back with a glass of sweet tea going, yep, I got this. This is cool. Whatever. Yes, sir. So he goes to the train station and nobody there. So then he's like, you know what?
Kind of fading out again.
Oh, boy.
Yes.
All right. So Sam Woods, good old boy, goes to the train station looking for anybody trying to flee the scene. And he ends up finding, they don't ask him his name. They don't ask him where he's from. They don't ask him anything. They just tell him to pretty much sit down, shut up, and come with me. You're under suspicion. And it's a black man, only man in the station. Sam Woods went right into the colored section because this is still segregated, still the South in the 60s, so everything is segregated. Beats down the door, and there is this man sitting there. So he pushes him up against the wall, cuffs him, drags him out into his car, and like pushes him into the back seat. And it's a very violent sounding encounter. And the way he's speaking to Virgil, who we don't know is Virgil at this point, is very derogatory. It's very 1960s South Carolina, pretty much. Brings him back to the station, and that's where the chief officer gets a look at him, and he says, oh, yeah, you're guilty.
Still barely. You're.
I don't know what it is. Shoot. I don't know why it's doing that.
Are you on Wi-Fi or are you on landline?
I'm on my hotspot because the Wi-Fi sucks. Let me get closer to it. Oh, look. Fabio.
Yeah.
Try to get him out of the background. Maybe it was because I had to move my phone. I don't know. It was so much fun. Stay. Ouch. I'm not sure. Okay. Try this again. Only really if I like freeze, just let me know. Okay. We're still recording. Fun fact. So I'm just gonna keep going and we'll edit it out. But so they bring him back to the police station. Lo and behold, they find out that this is Virgil Tibbs. He's not a suspect because he was going from his mother's house in South Carolina back to Pasadena. He's been waiting in the train station all night, just trying to catch a train. And he gives them his badge number and his ID. They end up calling Pasadena police office, and they're like, oh yeah, he's one of our best homicide detectives. Do you guys want to use him if you have a murder case? And of course, these white police officers in the South are going, do we have to? Do we really need to? That's when there's a board that kind of, it's a small town in the South, so there's like a board of trustees pretty much that help make all these decisions. One of the board members comes in, he's like, I heard the conductor got killed. Let me know if there's anything I can help you with. And Virgil Tibbs stands up and he's kind of like, oh, hello, sir. My name's Virgil Tibbs. I'm a homicide detective from Pasadena. And the board member goes, oh, excellent. First off, integration. Second off, you're a homicide detective. We need one of those.
Yeah.
And that's when the chief goes, oh, man, this isn't good. I have to work with this guy now.
Yeah.
I don't want to work with this guy. I'm just going to kind of push him off to the side, whatever. So they go back to the crime scene. Virgil Tibbs does his in-depth research of the scene. Like, he looks at the body, looks at the evidence, looks at the wallet. And this whole story pretty much is condensed into 2 or 3 days of them trying to conduct this research, of them trying to work with each other. So Sam Woods ends up getting partnered with Virgil Tibbs while the police chief is kind of sitting there going, still don't want to work with this guy. So Sam, you just do whatever you do. If he has to be along, whatever. And it is a murder mystery, so I don't really want to give away the ending. I won't say who does it, but I will say it's a twist. I didn't expect it.
Really?
I had one person in mind the entire story, who is one of the family of Italian immigrants who's there specifically to set up a music festival. I thought he was the suspect because he was acting pretty shady, and even Virgil Tibbs was like, I think he did it. And then at the end, it wasn't him at all. It was somebody completely different. And I was like, oh,
a red herring.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the last 5 pages that you hear it. So
Wow, that's pretty
Yeah.
close to the
Yeah.
end.
I was like, that's a twist. Good job,
Yeah.
sir.
Ooh.
Something else in the story that's really important is that Sam Woods gets accused of not raping, but of assaulting a white girl, another down and out. So there's pretty much like three sections of Wells, South Carolina. There's main town where like everybody is, downtown,
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. The wealthy people live nearby. Then you have, and this is in the author's words pretty much, you have the poor black section. And he
Yep.
describes it, unpaved roads, shanties everywhere, quiet, not even a dog barking. And then there's the poor white section of town. And it's always filled with activity. There's always something going on. There's always something shady going on. And there's this one family, the Purdys. And there's this girl, Delores Purdy, who, again, in this is kind of like the archetype poor white girl, I will
Yeah.
say, in the 60s. She's looking for a husband. She's looking to get out of her situation.
Yeah.
And specifically, she has her eyes set on Sam Woods because
Yep.
she sees him driving by every night on his rounds, and he goes right by her house. So every single night, she undresses in front of the window right as he's driving by. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she ends up coming into the police station in the midst of this murder investigation and saying, Sam Woods did me wrong and I'm pregnant with his baby and all this sort of stuff. And it's another red herring that comes into it because it has
Yeah.
nothing to do with the case. But Sam Woods, the police officer who's helping investigate this murder, is arrested and put in jail for like 2 to 3 days
Wow.
because of what he supposedly did.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it was interesting to look at these different civil things that are going on between poor, black, white, Italian,
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff is going on. And it's only a
It's
160 pages book.
Oh wow, that's not
Yeah.
big at all.
Yeah, no, it's quick.
Yeah. Did Sam and Virgil become friends or begrudgingly become friends, or how did that work?
So you actually really like Sam in the end because he has such a good character progression. He
Yeah.
starts off being typical, don't want to work with him,
Yeah.
he's black, whatever. And then within 5 pages of meeting him after viewing how Virgil inspects the scene, he's like, oh, he's kind of a good police officer. Okay, I don't
Yeah.
really like him still, but whatever.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the book, they're, I wouldn't say best friends, but Sam does respect Virgil and respect his methods. And he says, hey, I don't think he ever says, I'll work with you again, but he's like, yeah, no, you're a good guy.
Yeah.
So they part on good terms.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Now, in the movie with Sidney Poitier and Carol O'Connor, there's the famous scene where Carol O'Connor smacks him
Yes.
and Sidney Poitier smacks him right back. Was that in the book?
I don't think so. But there were
Okay.
multiple occasions of Sam, Carol O'Connor's character,
Yeah.
slapping, pushing around Virgil Tibbs. Really only that first scene, though, was the most violent where Sam comes across Virgil in the train station. That was when he got like the most hands-on, the most physical
Yeah.
of the whole book. Virgil, throughout the whole book, he's kind of portrayed as this very classy guy, I guess you
Yeah.
would say. He's very soft-spoken, he's
Yep.
patient, he's mild-mannered. Whenever they try to like push back on him, he doesn't react. He's just like, okay, sure,
Yeah.
whatever. And in the foreword, there's actually a really good quote. I'll read this to you. Virgil Tibbs is at times a black man more carefully constructed than fully realized, an approximation of life designed to thwart a common enemy, but to be of no threat to its originator. In 1965, Tibbs gave readers an idealized view of progress. He was an example that rather being militant, blacks could and should be able to work for change within the system, racist as the system was.
Right.
So he was kind of like this ideal character from the
Yeah.
mythical land of California.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And at times they talk about California as like this magic place where anything could happen, like integration. And it was just, it's also interesting because if we think about, you read a book that was set in post-Civil War time, and if you think about how Black people were portrayed in those books, they were kind of always portrayed as and this isn't by no means true, they were portrayed as dumb. They were portrayed as simple. They didn't know what to do. They were always fighting, you know, typical racist comments. And in this book, it kind of flips it on its head to where Virgil is the well-educated, mild-mannered, soft-spoken, like idealized figure. And all these white people who are police officers are dumb hicks. Yeah. And that was one of the author's quotes. He actually called them dumb hicks. And I was like, oh, that's
interesting. In the Philadelphian, I don't think there's one Black person in the entire book.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Everybody is WASP or Irish or the one Italian at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the city of brotherly love.
Yeah.
In the 50s.
Yeah. Interesting.
Very interesting. But yeah, so that's In the Heat of the Night. I enjoyed it as much as I could. It was hard for me to read at times because they use the N-word a lot. Because it was set in the 60s. It was written in the 60s.
Yep.
How many
books were in the series?
There were, let me see. I think there were quite a few. Bum, 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 bum. I don't know. Virgil Tibbs. I'm on the Google now.
I understand. The Google machine.
The Google. There are 7 books in total. And they all center around Virgil Tibbs. And he goes to multiple different places. So the second one, it looks like it's set at a nudist colony in Los Angeles.
And that's why they never made that one into a movie.
There you go. The third one is set in Pasadena on a Hollywood set. And then a lot of these are set in California. It looks like the first one was the only one set in South Carolina, which is interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. So next time I'll be reading a book from the 70s.
Yep.
You'll be reading a book from the 80s.
Yeah. Rock and roll.
Yes. I've already started mine.
Oh, I haven't even found mine yet, so I better get on that.
Yeah. What are you going to do?
Maybe I'll read something with Fabio in it.
There you go.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Why not?
All right, Terry. Well, thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. And I will see you next time.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.